5 minutes of funk is still my joint till this day. R.I.P. to an underrated legend. Man, that one YouTube comment says it all. When John Ecstasy Fletcher stepped on stage in that signature Zorro hat, you knew something special was about to happen. Smooth voice, crazy stage presence, and that classy swagger that made Whodini stand out when hip-hop was still finding its identity. They gave us timeless hits, friends. One Love, Freaks Come Out at Night, tracks that still light up block parties today. But despite breaking barriers and becoming the first hip-hop group to go platinum, Whodini's story rarely gets told. So how did a pioneer like Ecstasy fade into the shadows? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. John Fletcher, known to the world as Ecstasy, was born on the 7th of June, 1964, in Brooklyn, New York, a city that would soon become the birthplace of hip-hop itself. Growing up in the tough but vibrant neighborhoods of Bedford-Stuyvesant, young John was surrounded by rhythm long before he even knew what rap was. Brooklyn in the late 1960 and early 1970 wasn't easy. Man poverty, rising crime, and the echoes of the civil rights movement still hanging in the air. But through that struggle came creativity. You could hear soul music blasting from apartment windows, gospel harmonies from Sunday churches, and funk grooves bouncing from every street corner. John's family was working class, tight-knit, and proud. His parents believed in hard work and discipline, but they also let their kids dream. And for John, that dream was rhythm. As a teenager, he started hanging around local block parties, the heart of early hip-hop culture. DJs would set up massive speakers on the corners, and the crowd would go wild. Back then, the MC wasn't even the star yet, it was the DJ, the turntables, the beats. But John, man, he had charisma. He loved the performance side of it, how you could control a crowd with words and style. He didn't come from money or formal training. What he had was something raw presence. That deep baritone voice, smooth as velvet, would later become one of the most recognizable sounds in rap. People used to say he talked like a preacher and rhymed like a poet. He carried himself with confidence, even when there wasn't much around him to feel confident about. But that's Brooklyn for you. You either learn to shine through the struggle or you fade into the noise. By the late 1970s, hip-hop was beginning to spread from the Bronx down through the 5 boroughs, and John was right in the middle of it. He'd watch DJs like Grandmaster Flash spin breakbeats, and young MCs start rhyming over instrumentals. That energy, that competition, it was addictive. You could say it was destiny that someone like John would get pulled in. Still, he wasn't just about rhymes. He was fascinated by image, by style. He noticed how artists like George Clinton and Bootsy Collins used fashion as performance. Those funky hats, those larger-than-life outfits, it was showmanship, and that idea would stick with him for years. Even before Whodini, Ecstasy understood that in music, how you look can say as much as what you say. His teenage years were about discovery. He tried odd jobs, hung around local musicians, and absorbed the rhythm of the streets. There wasn't much opportunity, but there was plenty of inspiration. That mix of struggle, soul, and survival created the foundation of who he'd become. In the early 1980s, Brooklyn was buzzing. Music was changing, and hip-hop was beginning to take over park jams, roller rinks, and underground clubs. And somewhere in that electric scene, John Fletcher was about to meet the man who would change his life, Jaleel Hutchins. That meeting would spark one of the most important partnerships in early hip-hop history, a duo that would blend storytelling, style, and funk like nobody else. But before the world knew them as Whodini, they were just two hungry kids from New York, trying to make something out of nothing. By the early 1980s, Brooklyn had become a creative storm. Breakdancers spun on cardboard, graffiti artists turned subway cars into moving galleries, and block parties were the pulse of the neighborhood. It was in this atmosphere that John Fletcher, soon to be known as Ecstasy, crossed paths with Jaleel Hutchins, a sharp, witty lyricist who shared the same hunger for music and expression. Jaleel was more of a writer, a thinker. He loved wordplay, loved building clever rhymes that could tell stories. John, on the other hand, was pure presence, deep voice, magnetic confidence, that cool factor you couldn't fake. When they met, It wasn't just two kids vibing over beats, it was chemistry, man. They immediately clicked, like two pieces of a puzzle finally finding each other. According to Jalil, he and John started hanging out at recording studios in Manhattan, just trying to get close to the scene. They weren't big yet, far from it, but they looked like stars. John had already begun developing his signature image, the wide-brimmed hats, leather outfits, shades that gave him that mysterious charm. That look would later make him one of hip-hop's first sex symbols. Back then, hip-hop groups were mostly focused on braggadocious rhymes or party anthems. But Jalil and John wanted something smoother, something that mixed the street with sophistication. They admired the storytelling of funk legends like George Clinton and the production precision of R&B bands. So when they started forming ideas for their group, they wanted to stand apart from the rest. They came up with the name Whodini, a clever nod to the magician Harry Houdini. The name symbolized mystery, illusion, and transformation, all the things they wanted to bring into their music. They didn't want to be predictable. They wanted to make people say, "Who are these guys?" That blend of mystery and confidence fit them perfectly. Their early demo tapes started catching attention around New York's music circles. Jive Records, a British label trying to tap into the emerging American hip-hop scene, took notice. They signed Whodini and paired them with producer Larry Smith, a genius who would later help shape the sound of Run D, MC, and other early rap icons. Larry immediately saw what made John and Jalil special. He understood that their sound needed to be clean, funky, and polished, something that could play on both the radio and in the clubs. Together, they began crafting songs that fused electronic production with real musicality. This was a time when most hip-hop tracks were just raw beats and rhymes, but Whodini brought melody, hooks, and harmony. In 1982, Whodini dropped their first single, Magic's Wand, one of the very first rap songs to have a full-length music video. That was huge. The track was funky, catchy, and different. It was produced by Thomas Dolby, yes, the same guy behind She Blinded Me with Science. Magic's Wand wasn't just a song, it was a statement. Hip-hop could be futuristic, funky, and fun. Fans didn't fully realize it at the time, but this was the birth of something special. Two Brooklyn kids, one voice like thunder and one pen like poetry, were about to reshape what hip-hop could sound like. And man, when that first hit landed, it set the stage for one of the most underrated legacies in rap history. When Magic's Wand hit the airwaves in 1982, it didn't just introduce Whodini, it introduced a new sound, a new kind of cool to hip-hop. Man, you gotta remember, this was before rap was on MTV every day, before hip-hop was even respected by the mainstream. Most rap songs were raw, loud, party-driven. But Whodini, they came with polish, they came with groove, they came with style. John Ecstasy Fletcher was the face of that style. He wasn't yelling into the mic, he was smooth. Deep voice, calm delivery, and this confident aura that made every line feel like gospel. He carried himself more like a soul singer than a rapper. And next to him, Jalil Hutchins wrote verses that actually told stories. Together, they had something rare in early hip-hop balance. Jalil was the mind, Ecstasy was the presence. Working with producer Larry Smith turned out to be a blessing. Larry wasn't just a beatmaker, he was a visionary. He knew how to blend live instruments with electronic production, giving Whodini's music a full, rich sound that stood out from the competition. While other artists were looping breakbeats, Larry added bass lines, keyboards, and funky guitar riffs that made Whodini's records bump on dance floors and sound good on the radio. Their debut album, Whodini, dropped in 1983, featuring Magic's Wand, Haunted House of Rock, and the Haunted House of Rock remix. The group's spooky humor and catchy hooks showed fans that hip-hop could have personality and storytelling. Haunted House of Rock even became a Halloween favorite, one of the first rap songs tied to a holiday theme. You could hear it playing at block parties, school dances, and even roller rinks. It was hip-hop with a twist. But what really made Whodini special wasn't just their sound, it was their image. When Ecstasy walked on stage in his wide-brimmed hat, black leather shorts, and shades, the crowd went nuts. Nobody in rap looked like that. He looked like a cross between a rock star and a movie villain. Mysterious, sexy, confident. He brought glamour to a genre that had been all grit. Fans, especially women, noticed. In one interview, Jalil later laughed and said, "Ecstasy was the one who made people scream. He had that star energy." And that was true. Whether it was on TV shows, concerts, or magazine covers, Ecstasy stood out. You saw that hat, that swagger, that smile, you knew exactly who it was. And behind that image was talent. Ecstasy's baritone voice gave Whodini their signature tone. It grounded their tracks, gave them warmth and maturity. In songs like The Haunted House of Rock, he wasn't just rapping, he was narrating, guiding listeners through a vibe. That combination of voice, rhythm, and charisma became their trademark. Meanwhile, Jalil's lyrics hit differently. He wrote songs about friendship, love, loyalty, jealousy, things people could relate to. That was almost unheard of at the time. Most rappers were talking about parties or bragging rights. Whodini wrote songs that spoke to people. And that human touch, that emotional honesty, is what made their audience loyal. Whodini's stage shows were another story. Man, pure energy. When they performed, it wasn't just two guys and a mic. They had routines, choreography, and timing. They turned rap shows into performances. And when they added Grandmaster D as their official DJ, it completed the trio. D's scratching and mixing elevated their live act to a whole new level. By 1984, they were touring across the country, sharing stages with Run D, MC, the Fat Boys, and Curtis Blow. The Fresh Fest tour, the first nationwide hip-hop tour, made history, and Whodini was right there in the mix. Fans remember those nights vividly. One fan wrote online, "I saw Whodini in 1985 at the Fresh Fest in Oakland. Continue to RIP Ecstasy. That show was unforgettable." Those tours cemented their reputation. Whodini wasn't just another rap act. They were pioneers bringing professionalism to hip-hop. They dressed clean, spoke respectfully, and carried themselves with class. That made them appealing to parents as well as kids. As one fan put it, "Our parents wouldn't mind Whodini, they loved the message in their music." And that's what made them stand out. While others were trying to be the loudest, Whodini chose to be the smartest. Their lyrics had depth, their beats had soul, and their performances had polish. Still, even with the buzz building, they were just getting started. Because the next album they dropped, man, that's when everything changed. That's when Whodini went from respected to legendary. By 1984, Whodini had gone from underground innovators to full-blown stars. Their second album, Escape, dropped that year. And man, it changed everything. If their debut showed potential, Escape proved they were here to stay. With Larry Smith once again on production, Whodini created a record that perfectly balanced funk, soul, and the emerging sound of electronic hip-hop. The album became a cultural landmark, eventually going platinum, making Whodini one of the first hip-hop acts ever to achieve that milestone. And when you press play on Escape, the first thing that hits you is 5 minutes of funk. That beat, instant electricity. The song was pure confidence, energetic, danceable, but still lyrical. It opened every party, every skating rink, every high school gym back then. Fans still talk about it to this day. One viewer wrote, "5 minutes of funk is still my joint till this day. RIP, to an underrated legend." That's not nostalgia, that's respect. The song captured the essence of Whodini's formula. Big beats, sharp rhymes, and Ecstasy's smooth baritone gliding over it all. His voice was magnetic, it gave the track authority and sex appeal. When he performed it live, he didn't even have to shout. He just walked on stage, hat tilted low, and the crowd went crazy. That's presence you can't teach. Then came Friends, and man, that record hit different. Released in 1984, it wasn't just a catchy tune, it was a message. Jalil's lyrics about betrayal and loyalty struck a nerve. Friends, how many of us have them? That line became a cultural saying, quoted everywhere from playgrounds to sitcoms. You didn't even have to be a rap fan to know it. Friends took hip-hop into emotional territory no one had touched before. It wasn't about bragging or fighting, it was about real life. People connected to it because everyone, at some point, had felt that disappointment of trusting the wrong person. Ecstasy's delivery gave it weight. He didn't sound angry or bitter, he sounded wise, reflective, like a big brother giving you advice. That's part of why Whodini connected across generations. Kids loved the groove, but adults heard truth in the lyric. And then, just when you thought they couldn't top that, They dropped Freaks Come Out at Night. What a vibe, man. Funky, playful, a little mischievous, the kind of song that turned every dance floor into a movie. That track showcased Whodini's sense of humor and storytelling. You could practically see the neon lights, the nightclubs, the fashion. And once again, Ecstasy's deep voice anchored the fun. With Escape, Whodini wasn't just making hits, they were creating moments. Each song felt cinematic. The album flowed like a soundtrack to urban nightlife in the 1980, cool, mysterious, and endlessly danceable. Critics praised it for its clean production and melodic structure, and fans couldn't get enough. The record sold over 1 million copies, making Whodini one of the first rap acts to go platinum, a title many people still overlook. They toured the world, rocking stages from New York to London to Tokyo. On the Fresh Fest tour, they shared the lineup with Run DMC, LL Cool J, and the Fat Boys, and they held their own. People who were there still remember their set as one of the best live performances of the era. One fan wrote, "They gave the greatest live show ever." Another said, "Whodini is in my top 3 groups of all time. When Ecstasy died, it hurt like I knew him personally." That's the kind of emotional bond Whodini built. Their music wasn't just entertainment, it was a part of people's lives. Visually, they were ahead of the game, too. The Zorro hat became an icon. That wide-brimmed black hat with leather shorts and knee-high boots, bold, confident, unapologetically stylish. Ecstasy's look influenced later artists like LL Cool J, Slick Rick, and even Prince in how they mixed masculinity with flair. It showed that hip-hop could be fashionable and theatrical without losing its edge. Even the way they structured songs was unique. Whodini wrote complete narratives, beginnings, middles, endings, often with moral lessons. One Love talked about the importance of appreciating what you have. Big Mouth warned against gossip. Funky Beat celebrated rhythm itself. Their music taught, entertained, and made you move all at once. Behind the scenes, Larry Smith continued shaping their sound, giving each track that distinctive funk backbone. His influence stretched beyond Whodini. He also produced for Run DMC and helped define what 80 Seconds hip-hop would sound like. Fans today still call for him to be recognized as one of the architects of modern rap production. By the mid-1980s, Whodini were household names. They performed on television, appeared in magazines, and inspired a generation of artists. But while their peers were celebrated in documentaries and Hall of Fame lists, Whodini often got left out of the spotlight. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was the quiet professionalism they carried. They didn't chase drama, they just made great music. And that's the crazy part, man. Whodini did everything right. Hit records, platinum sales, sold-out tours, clean image. Yet somehow, history didn't give them their full due. Still, for those who were there and for the fans who discovered them later, Escape remains one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever made. It was a moment when hip-hop proved it could be soulful, thoughtful, and timeless. And at the center of it all stood Ecstasy, mysterious, magnetic, and cool as ever, redefining what a rapper could be. By 1985, Whodini were no longer just a hip-hop act, they were stars. Their music crossed radio formats, their videos played on TV, and their live shows had become the stuff of legend. The group wasn't chasing trends, they were setting them. At a time when rap was still fighting for legitimacy, Whodini made it sound sophisticated, soulful, and international. The Escape album continued to dominate the charts through 1985, and its singles Friends, 5 Minutes of Funk, Freaks Come Out at Night became anthems. These songs weren't just local hits, they had crossover appeal. Urban stations, R&B stations, even pop audiences were tuning in. Hip-hop had found a smoother face and it was wearing a black leather hat. Ecstasy, with his deep baritone and that movie star look, was becoming one of the first recognizable frontmen in rap. Before LL Cool J, before Big Daddy Kane, before even the ladies' man image became a staple, Ecstasy embodied it naturally. He didn't try to be sexy, he just was. Fans called him hip-hop's Zorro. Women loved him, men respected him, and everybody agreed that his voice made Whodini's records unforgettable. When Whodini stepped on stage, it wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Their live performances were tight, disciplined, and powerful. Grandmaster D cut the records like a surgeon, Jalil delivered the clever bars, and Ecstasy commanded the crowd with poise and swagger. One fan who saw them on tour said, "They lifted Grandmaster D off his feet, and he was still cutting them records." That level of energy, man, it was unmatched. The Fresh Fest tour in 1985 marked their true breakthrough moment. Whodini toured the country with Run DMC, the Fat Boys, and Curtis Blow, bringing hip-hop to major arenas for the first time. These weren't just concerts, they were cultural milestones. Fans who had only seen rap in parks or clubs now watched it on the big stage, lights flashing, thousands screaming, and Whodini consistently stole the show. People who were there still talk about those nights like sacred memories. One fan recalled, "I went to the Fresh Fest in Long Beach and still have the ticket stub." Whodini had the crowd in the palm of their hand. That's legacy right there. Behind all the showmanship, though, there was a serious level of artistry. Larry Smith's production kept evolving crisp drum machines, funky bass lines, and futuristic synths that made every Whodini song sound expensive. Jalil and Ecstasy took pride in their writing, often penning lyrics with moral lessons or emotional honesty. They weren't just rhyming, they were communicating. In 1986, they released their third album, Back in Black. It didn't surpass Escape, but it proved that Whodini could stay relevant. The album had bangers like Funky Beat and One Love, both of which reinforced their signature sound. One Love, in particular, became another timeless anthem. The chorus, one love, you're lucky just to have one love, captured something universal. It's the kind of line that people still quote decades later. Ecstasy's performance on One Love is one of the smoothest moments in rap history. His delivery is calm but emotional, reflective but confident. You can feel the maturity in his tone, the understanding that fame, friendship, and love all have a price. It's one of those songs that grows more powerful the older you get. By this point, Whodini's influence was everywhere. You could hear traces of their style in acts like Run D, MC, the Beastie Boys, and even early LL Cool J. They had made storytelling and melody acceptable in rap, something later perfected by artists like Will Smith, Outkast, and Kanye West. Their sound was the bridge between the raw beginnings of hip-hop and the polished, radio-ready style that would dominate the late 1980. And yet, even at their peak, Whodini weren't always given the same credit as their peers. Maybe it was because they weren't controversial. They weren't beefing with other artists or stirring drama. They just made good music and kept it classy. While others were getting tabloid attention, Whodini stayed professional, which, ironically, may have made them less visible in the long run. Still, within the culture, everyone knew what they meant. Other rappers looked up to them. Producers admired their sound. DJs studied their stagecraft. They were pioneers, plain and simple. Whodini had proven that rap could be smooth, romantic, funky, and universal. And that image of Ecstasy, standing under the stage lights with his hat tilted low, became iconic. For a brief, beautiful moment, they were untouchable. But success in the music industry can be cruel. As hip-hop evolved into new forms, harder, darker, more aggressive, the same polish that made Whodini shine would soon make them seem out of place. The sound of the streets was changing fast, and not everyone survived the shift. By the late 1980s, hip-hop was transforming at lightning speed. The clean, polished sound that had defined Whodini's era was suddenly being overshadowed by something grittier, harder beats, rougher rhymes, and an attitude that reflected the changing streets. Public Enemy, NWA, and 2 Live Crew were rising, bringing a new edge to the culture. Overnight, the tone of the game had shifted, and groups like Whodini, once the soundtrack of block parties and radio shows, were suddenly seen as part of a different generation. Ecstasy felt that shift deeply. He had built his career on charm and class, on funk, love, and storytelling. But now, rap had turned toward confrontation and rebellion. The industry wanted controversy, not smooth talk. Record labels were chasing whatever sold fastest, and the pressure hit Whodini hard. Their label, Jive Records, which once championed them, began prioritizing newer acts like A Tribe Called Quest and DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Whodini's classic sound, the one that opened the doors for those same artists, started getting pushed aside. That kind of industry shift hurts, man. You go from being the pioneers to the veterans, and before you realize it, the calls slow down. Even though Whodini had just dropped Back in Black and later Open Sesame in 1987, radio airplay wasn't the same. MTV moved on to the next wave. Whodini still had fans, loyal ones, but the business side was cold. There were also internal challenges. Jalil and Ecstasy, like any long-term creative partners, started feeling tension. Years of touring, label politics, and the constant fight for attention took a toll. Ecstasy wanted to evolve, to adapt to the times, but the group's chemistry wasn't the same as in those early days. They weren't enemies, but they were growing in different directions. Grandmaster D stayed loyal, but it was clear that the group's golden era had passed. To make things worse, the group wasn't seeing the money they deserved. Like many early hip-hop artists, their contracts were far from fair. Jive Records owned much of their publishing and masters, meaning Whodini saw only a fraction of the revenue their platinum records generated. Years later, industry insiders would reveal that Jive's deals with early rap acts were notoriously exploitative, and Whodini were among those caught in the trap. Fans didn't know that part of the story back then. To them, Whodini had just faded away, but behind the scenes, it was heartbreak. You could be one of the first hip-hop groups to go platinum and still struggle financially. That's the cruel irony of being a pioneer. You help build the house, but you don't always get to live in it. By the early 1990s, hip-hop was dominated by gangsta rap and hardcore realism. Whodini's brand of funk-infused storytelling didn't fit the new formula. They tried to adapt 1991's Bag of Tricks, had a more contemporary sound, but it didn't make much noise. The new generation of fans didn't know them. The older fans had moved on. Still, Ecstasy didn't lose his love for music. Even when the industry cooled off, he stayed creative, performing at old-school shows and occasionally reuniting with Jalil and Grandmaster D for concerts. But those moments were bittersweet. The crowd still cheered, still sang Friends word for word, but the spotlight had moved on. Ecstasy once said in an interview that fame is like borrowed time. You get to hold it for a while, but you can't keep it forever. And man, he was right. As the years passed, his life took quieter turns. He moved out of the constant noise of the industry, choosing a simpler, more grounded existence. At one point, he even worked as a dispatcher for EMS 911 Inches New York, the same job one fan later mentioned online, saying, "My sister worked with Ecstasy. He was cool, humble, and always smiling." That humility, that groundedness, was who John Fletcher really was. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, he stayed genuine, a family man, a brother, a friend. But no matter how much time passed, one truth remained. Whodini's sound never truly disappeared. You could hear echoes of their style in the smooth storytelling of early 90s hip-hop, in the funk samples that shaped artists like Dr. Dre and Outkast. Their DNA was everywhere, even if their names weren't always mentioned. The industry might have moved on, but the culture never forgot. Every time a DJ dropped 5 minutes of funk or that iconic line, "Friends, how many of us have them?" the crowd still reacted. The spirit of Whodini lived on through those beats, through that voice, through Ecstasy's hat-tipped silhouette burned into hip-hop history. But behind that legacy was a man who had lived through the highs, the heartbreak, and the fading light of fame. And soon, the world would be reminded just how much he meant. After the lights dimmed and the charts stopped calling their name, John "Ecstasy" Fletcher quietly stepped away from the fame that had once defined him. The man who used to command thousands on stage traded the roar of crowds for the rhythm of everyday life. And you know what? He didn't complain. He accepted it with grace. That's the thing about Ecstasy. He never acted bitter, never threw shade at the industry. He understood that music had seasons, and his had already changed. By the late 1990s and into the 2000s, Ecstasy was living mostly out of the spotlight. He'd pop up occasionally for interviews, reunions, or old-school shows, rocking that same hat and that same quiet confidence. Fans who saw him were always struck by how genuine he was. He didn't carry himself like a fallen star. He was humble, approachable, a man at peace with his legacy. One fan shared an incredible story online. "My sister worked with Ecstasy. He was working for EMS 911 as a dispatcher in New York. She said he was cool and humble. That kind of story says everything about his character. No ego, no 'do you know who I am' attitude. just a man who had lived a full life and still cared about helping others. Even during the years when Whodini wasn't in heavy rotation, Ecstasy knew their music still mattered. Whenever he performed Friends or One Love at throwback concerts, the crowd erupted like it was still 1985. And you could see it on his face, that same spark, that joy. It reminded him why he started in the first place. But life after fame isn't always simple. The money from those early contracts had long dried up, and Whodini never got the financial rewards they truly deserved. While newer rappers were cashing million-dollar checks, pioneers like Ecstasy often lived modestly. The music industry rarely takes care of its trailblazers, yet he never played the victim. He stayed positive, even spiritual. He also faced personal challenges that fans rarely saw. Friends close to him said he carried a quiet sadness, not regret, but reflection. The kind that comes from seeing how far hip-hop had come, and how easily some of its founders were forgotten. He'd sometimes mention how weird it felt to hear younger artists sample or reference Whodini's songs without even realizing where they came from. Still, he was proud. When artists like Pusha T and Outkast mentioned Whodini as influences, it meant something to him. It meant the legacy had survived. As the years rolled on, the trio occasionally reunited. Ecstasy, Jalil, and Grandmaster D hit the stage at old-school hip-hop festivals, performing their hits to crowds that spanned generations. You'd see parents bringing their kids, introducing them to the music that built hip-hop's foundation. And every time Ecstasy said that line, "Friends, how many of us have them?" the crowd shouted it right back. That's immortality, man. In his later years, Ecstasy lived quietly with his family in Georgia. He stayed active, still performing here and there, still giving interviews to celebrate hip-hop's roots. He was proud, but humble, reflective, but never bitter. Then, on the 23rd of December 2020, the world got the heartbreaking news John "Ecstasy" Fletcher had passed away at the age of 56. The cause wasn't immediately made public. Fans across the globe flooded the internet with tributes. Comments poured in, "Gone but never forgotten." Whodini gave us the soundtrack of our youth. R.I.P. to an underrated legend. He may have left quietly, but his impact roared louder than ever. When the news of Ecstasy's passing broke in December 2020, the hip-hop community went silent for a moment, then erupted in love, stories, and memories. Artists, DJs, and fans from every generation came forward to pay tribute. Questlove, Jermaine Dupri, Chuck D, and so many others called Whodini the blueprint. It was one of those rare moments when the world stopped to recognize how much one group and one man had truly shaped the music we love. The tributes weren't just about nostalgia. They were about foundation. Before rap had megatours, gold chains, and corporate sponsorships, Whodini proved that hip-hop could be professional, lyrical, stylish, and global. They were pioneers of stagecraft, the first rap group to tour with a full crew, dancers, and lighting setups. They brought structure and artistry to live rap performances, and that's something every act after them borrowed, knowingly or not. Ecstasy, in particular, left behind something more subtle presence. He was one of the first rappers to realize that charisma could be as powerful as bars, that you didn't have to scream to be heard. You could just walk on stage with confidence and make people pay attention. His calm power influenced generations of MCs, from LL Cool J to Nas to Big Daddy Kane. That baritone voice became a prototype for cool. And then there was style. The Zorro hat, the leather shorts, the boots. That wasn't just fashion, man. That was identity. Before rappers had stylists, Ecstasy had vision. He brought showmanship into hip-hop, turning every performance into a visual statement. When you saw him, you didn't just hear the music, you felt the attitude. That balance of street and sophistication became a model for what hip-hop stars could look like. Musically, Whodini's fingerprints are everywhere. You can hear echoes of Friends and 5 Minutes of Funk sampled or referenced by artists across decades. Nas, Kanye West, Jermaine Dupri, and even Pusha T have all nodded to their influence. That famous line, "Friends, how many of us have them?" has been replayed, remixed, and quoted in everything from sitcoms to advertisements. It's one of those phrases that outgrew the song itself, embedding into culture like a proverb. And let's not forget the producers and DJs who grew up idolizing their sound. Larry Smith's work with Whodini became a foundation for how hip-hop fused funk and electronic music. You can trace a direct line from Escape to early West Coast production, to G-Funk, to the smooth storytelling vibe of Outkast and The Roots. Whodini helped prove that rap didn't have to be all aggression. It could groove, it could reflect, it could breathe. Even in their quieter years, Whodini's influence never faded. Their music kept popping up in movies, commercials, and documentaries about hip-hop's origins. For many fans, their songs were a time machine, a reminder of when rap still felt new and joyful. One fan wrote online, "Whodini is one of my top 3 groups of all time. When Ecstasy died, it felt like losing a friend." That's the power of legacy when people who never met you feel like they knew you. In 2018, Whodini received the I Am Hip Hop Icon Award at the BET Hip Hop Awards, honoring their contributions to the culture. When they performed Friends that night, the entire crowd, rappers, producers, fans, sang every word. It was proof that the music had never truly gone away. It had just been waiting for the world to look back and give credit where it was due. But even with recognition coming later in life, Whodini still hasn't been fully immortalized in the way they deserve. Fans continue to call for their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As one commenter said, they deserve to be in the Rock Hall of Fame, period. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that. They broke barriers before the industry was even ready to give them a lane. What makes Ecstasy's legacy so special is how personal it feels. He wasn't just part of hip-hop's early timeline, he was part of people's lives. For many, his voice was their first introduction to rap that felt soulful and mature. For others, it was the soundtrack of their youth. And for today's artists, his style remains a benchmark of authenticity, smooth, confident, timeless. Ecstasy may have left the stage, but his energy never disappeared. Every time someone samples Friends, every time a DJ spins 5 minutes of funk, every time a fan tells a story about seeing him live, that's his spirit still moving through the culture. Gone too soon, yes. But forgotten? Never. Because Whodini's legacy and Ecstasy's voice are written into the DNA of hip-hop itself. When you look back at the story of John "Ecstasy" Fletcher, it's hard not to feel both awe and heartbreak. Awe, because this man helped build a movement. Heartbreak, because even after all that the Platinum records, the iconic hits, the unforgettable style, his name still doesn't get shouted enough when we talk about hip-hop's greats. But that's what Celebrity Underrated is all about, right? Giving flowers to the ones who deserved them all along. Ecstasy wasn't just a rapper. He was an architect of cool. Before hip-hop had billionaires and brand deals, he showed that rappers could have presence, charisma, and sophistication. He proved you could be streetwise and stylish at the same time. That hat, those shades, that deep voice, they weren't just his image. They were his armor, his identity. When fans talk about Whodini, they don't just remember the music, they remember the feeling. That first beat of 5 minutes of funk that made the whole block move. That chorus from Friends that made people look around and wonder who was real. That smooth groove of One Love that made couples slow down on the dance floor. Those songs carried energy, wisdom, and warmth, just like Ecstasy himself. Even in death, he managed to unite generations. After his passing in December 2020, fans, young and old, filled comment sections, forums, and timelines with love. One fan wrote, "Whodini was the soundtrack of my youth," while another said, "Man, they don't make music like this anymore." You could feel the genuine emotion in every word. They weren't just mourning an artist, they were remembering a part of their own lives. And maybe that's the truest form of immortality, when your art becomes memory for millions. Whodini's catalog is still as fresh as ever. Their influence echoes through every artist who mixes funk with storytelling, who brings class to the stage, who writes songs that make people think. Every time a DJ drops, Friends, the crowd still sings it like a hymn. Every time Freaks Come Out at Night plays, the party still jumps. That's not nostalgia, that's legacy. So, when people ask, should Whodini be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? The answer isn't just yes, it's how are they not already there? They broke ground, set standards, and proved that rap could be fun, soulful, and intelligent all at once. Ecstasy may be gone, but his impact will forever echo through time in every beat, every sample, every smile from someone remembering their first Whodini concert. Because legends never die, they just get underrated.